I am not a big fan of scary games or horror games. Fortunately for me, Phasmophobia is not a horror game. Okay, so it sort of is, but it's really not. The gist of Phasmophobia is simple. You enter a house, use a bunch of tools to try to determine what kind of ghost is haunting the house, survive, leave, and get paid. Now, there's 24 different ghost types, and a house will have a random ghost selected. There are some randomized things like the location of the power breaker, the favorite room that the ghost is predominantly in, and in some cases what cursed item is there to benefit your investigation. You need to find pieces of evidence that inform the ghost type, maintain your sanity, and generally avoid getting killed. There are 7 different pieces of evidence, and each ghost has a unique, defined set of 3 pieces of evidence. So, for instance, EMF5, a ghost orb, and dots will always be a Raiju. On top of that, each ghost has a different hunt sanity threshold, with most sitting at 50% sanity. Drop below the threshold and they can start hunting to kill you. Different ghosts have different abilities, different idle behaviors, and different hunt-related behaviors. In short, watch the ghost to figure out what it is, then get out. This rigid grouping of evidence, abilities, and behaviors leads to an interesting consequence. Since each ghost has a unique set of evidence, if you're on a difficulty mode where the ghost will show all 3 pieces of evidence, you basically just need to stay alive until it shows you all the evidence. You still need to see the pieces of evidence, but it's less thinking, more surviving. However, if you play on a mode with fewer than 3 pieces of evidence, you can't rely on just seeing the 7 potential pieces of evidence. You also need to pay attention to the ghost's behavior, and it becomes a poorly lit logic game. There's learning the general ghost behavior, and then there's the learning curve that is learning about the abilities, thresholds, and behaviors of each individual ghost. But when the game is set to 2 or fewer pieces of evidence and it can't fill out the answers for you, you have to design tests to figure out the ghost based on how it acts. Let's take an example. It's nightmare mode, so we get a cursed item, but it's set to 1 piece of evidence. You walk into the house, find the room, and you get your evidence. Congratulations, it's freezing temps. This brings our total possible ghosts down to 11. One of these, the Moroi, has a forced evidence. It will always give the spirit box. Since this mode is set to 1 evidence and it wasn't a spirit box, we can rule it out. We now have a 1 in 10 chance of randomly guessing the ghost correctly. Another one of these is the Mimic, which can pretend to be a different ghost, mimicking its movement speed, hunt thresholds, etc. It's a pain, so we'll set it aside for now. We can take the remaining 9 and start to categorize them to get an idea of where to get some easy ways to rule out ghosts. One of them has a behavior or ability that is certain to trigger, 4 have behaviors or abilities with a chance to trigger, 6 have a normal hunt threshold while 3 do not, and 6 of them have hunt-related behaviors. We can then think about how we'd structure our approach. One way would be to start with ruling out the Mimic. Mimics will always have a ghost orb present, so at this stage in our example, if there is a ghost orb, it's certainly a Mimic. If not, we can rule it out. From there, if we are able to keep our sanity above 50%, but below the Onryo's hunt threshold of 60% and it hunts, we've narrowed it down to 2 possible ghosts. If not, and we drop our sanity below 50%, but above the Shade's hunt threshold of 35% and it hunts, we've narrowed it down to 6 possible ghosts. While it's hunting, if the ghost's movement speed is the normal walking speed, that narrows it down to 3 ghosts, and if it's faster or slower than normal, it narrows it down to the other 3 ghosts, though at that point the specific movement speed would probably give away what ghost it is. The 3 normal speed ghosts can then be further identified by their abilities or things like line of sight speed changes during a hunt. This is just one way to approach it, but you could easily structure it differently and still be successful. Now, in some respects, you could argue that each of these counts as a form of soft evidence, that is ultimately no different from observing and noting down the hard evidence. And while there's some truth to that, I find that there's enjoyment to be had in trying to figure out how to rule out certain ghosts on the fly. In some ways, the ghost is less of a spooky entity, though it's definitely still those things, and it's more like a mailman delivering you clues. It's not horror in the sense that you're trying to escape the ghost and get out of the house. Often it's the opposite. You're trying to seek it out, interacting with it in the hopes that you can trick it into exposing what it is. Oh! There's still those heart rate spiking elements, but there can be a lot of logic involved, and the act of evaluating and figuring out how to test for certain ghosts pushes through that primal survival instinct and tickles my brain like a reward for proper deduction. And that's about it. It's a fascinating game where its basic concept is complemented by the complexities contained in a simple framework. It's a neat study of how total randomness wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable as constrained mechanics. They gotta fix some of those lights though.